Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. That verse from Leviticus was one that really tripped me up. I looked up the word holy to be able to try and understand exactly what it meant. It meant what I thought it did. Perfect. No, not just perfect. 100% perfect. No, not just 100% perfect. Perfect without any compromise. Absolutely perfect. See, the truth is, when God declares that he's holy, he is the only one who has that right to say that he is holy. He stands alone in his perfection. As a matter of fact, there is no close second. But at the same time, he was telling me that I needed to be holy. The Bible that I was given as a teenager came in black leather and bound and with the word right on the front, holy. In other words, it was being laid out before me that, hey, you want to be able to measure up to what God wants you to be? Then you better make sure that you are holy, that you are being perfect. As a matter of fact, this Bible came to mean to me a whole lot of rules, laws, commandments, and especially a long list of do-nots. And so, if I was to gain God's acceptance and the affirmation that I so deeply wanted from him, then I would have to be holy. But how in the world was I going to achieve that? I knew enough looking at my own life at that time that there was no possible way that I could live a perfect life. When I looked through all the rules and the commandments and stuff like that, there were a few that I thought, hey, no brainer. I can keep that one. Like, do not eat bats. I can tell you that. Check it off at the beginning of the day, check it off at the end of the day. Bats were not on the menu. But when it came to many of the other things, I began to realize that there was no way that I could possibly measure up. Why was it so important to me to feel that I needed to measure up, that I needed to sort of attain that holiness that God was asking of me, that would reflect what his character was? And I think a big part of it was because Jesus said, I want you to be able to get to know my Father. And by the way, he wants to be your Father too. And by the way, because of what I'm going to do for you on the cross, because I'm going to give up my life, because of my blood being shed for forgiveness of sin, I will enable you to have a relationship with my Father. And I got to tell you something, having grown up fatherless, that was one thing I deeply desired. To know that I would have somebody as a father who would want to affirm me and would honestly look at me and think that I was worth being loved. You know, I knew he had to love me. I mean, because of that famous verse in the Bible, it says, for God so loved the world. Well, being part of the world, I knew that meant he would love me. But the truth is, I also wanted to know that he liked me. But I figured that the only way that I could gain that was if I could gain his approval by being holy, being perfect. Jesus was asked a question one time, and the question was this, which is the greatest commandment? And I'm thinking to myself, you know something? That's a great question. And I thought I understood where those guys were coming from in that question. Because if you could figure out what the greatest commandment was, then very likely, if you were able to keep that one, even if the other ones kind of became a mess, but if you were able to keep the one that God thought was the most important one, hey, then just maybe I could get his approval. Just maybe I could get him to like me. Here's the fascinating thing. I began to think to myself, so how would you answer that question, Paul? What do you think Jesus is going to say in terms of which is the greatest commandment? And I thought, well, could be some obvious ones like have no other God besides me. Well, hey, that could work. Or it could be something like no idols. Don't make any idols. Hey, I could live with that one too. Oh, maybe it'd be something like do not murder, because taking life, I mean, I can understand how serious an offense that was. But maybe something like a little more difficult, like keep the Sabbath holy, keep it perfectly, do no work on the Sabbath. I mean, the consequence for that one, according to the law, was death. So you only got a one fail opportunity on that one. And I began to think to myself, so which one of these would be the most important one to God so that I could get him to like me? And then Jesus answers with an answer that I wouldn't have expected at all. He said, the first and most important commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. In other words, love him with everything that you are. And then Jesus said, and by the way, there's a second one, and it's completely linked and joined with the first one. You can't do one without the second one to make it complete. and that is love your neighbor as yourself. Wow, I just never really quite saw that coming. All I was thinking to myself was all these lists of do nots. And what Jesus is saying is that really the most important thing in the world to God is that we love him. The most beautiful thing that it tells us in the scripture too, though, and that is that we love because he first loved us. And so it's a responsive love. It's a love that I have for him with everything that I am, because I realize that he loves me with everything that he is, which is why he sent his son Jesus into the world. And then Jesus tells me, and from that, I want you to be able to love your neighbor. But meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, hey, but God, in order for me to be holy, it seems like it's wrapped up in all this stuff that's all about do nots. What about all that stuff? And then it was explained to me one day that that verse in Leviticus, be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. That verse opens up those first two words, be holy, not as something that we are to attain because of our works, but rather we do it as a reflection of. And I began to think like, well, what does that mean? I thought about the whole fact that, you know something, if you held up a big mirror and you walk out into the sunlight and you aim that mirror towards the sun, the amazing thing about the mirror is it begins to reflect the light from the sun, and you can shine that light everywhere, and it's as bright as anything, and everywhere you shine it, that part lights up. And suddenly it occurred to me though too, that by itself the mirror has no light. You simply hang it in a dark room, it's not all of a sudden like it lights up the room. The mirror is simply becomes a reflection of what it's aimed at, what it's facing. And suddenly I began to realize that, God, that's exactly what you're asking me and what you're telling me. And that is that I am to be a reflection of who you are. Beautiful thing is that Matt shared with us already in the opening video of this series. And that is the whole thing about the fact that God's characteristics, who God is, everything comes from the core of who he is, and that is love. So God's holiness is a reflection first and foremost of his unbelievable love. And that's why Jesus is able to say, these are the two greatest commandments. And the beautiful thing about it is, he's saying to us, and by the way, you are to be a reflection of this love in everything that you do. So what about the do nots? I mean, where do they fit? Well, I really believe that what God wanted us to be able to appreciate and understand as we have that relationship with Jesus, as we're walking in the power of his Spirit, and that is this: do not murder does not mean that I get to the end of the day and I go, check, haven't killed anybody today. Must have had a really good day. I mean, there was times I might have wanted to, but I didn't do it. So, hey, did that one, Jesus. Good. I must be reflecting your holiness. No. You see, what that is for me is simply but a ground zero starting point. It's not so much that I went through my day and did not murder anybody, but was I a communicator and a conveyor of life? Was I somebody who, when I was meeting people and interacting with people throughout my day, that I was communicating life to them? That I actually, because of the moments that I spent with them in whatever small way or whatever large way, actually helped their life feel better? Another example, do not steal. It's not enough that I just didn't go through the day taking somebody else's property and claiming it as my own. But am I living generously? Am I somebody who's known as somebody who's a person of grace, looking for opportunity for me to be able to try and figure out how I can enrich the lives of somebody else around me? You see, that is reflecting the love of God and love for my neighbor. And not just simply saying to myself, I'm following a list of do nots. You see, this Bible is not about a list of rules. This Bible is about relationship. God initiating that relationship with me through Jesus and doing everything that needs to be done so that I can live the story of being fully accepted by him. That verse from Ephesians, we are saved by grace, not by works. End of sentence. Not by works. There is nothing I can do to become holy, but I can reflect his love. Beautiful thing that the Apostle Paul wrote was this. He said, hey, I just want you to be able to know something. Love is the fulfillment of the law. And then later in Galatians, he writes this other beautiful statement. He says that when it comes down to faith, the only thing that is of absolute and most importance is love. our ability to be able to reflect that love in everything that we do. What did that mean for me? It means that God is my Father. He does love me. And I want to be a reflection of that love. But the other thing that's beautiful about it is He likes me. He likes me just for who I am. Not for how I perform, not for what I do, and not for what I don't do. But rather He likes me especially as I'm simply becoming a reflection of the love that Jesus has for me. And my prayer for each one of you is that you would know the freedom that comes from simply living in the grip of the one who truly loves you. Thanks.